How's it going, guys? It's Eclipse here, and today's video we're going to be checking out tanks that you should avoid on World of Tanks console if you want to actually maintain your sanity in the game. Obviously there's a few of those throughout the tech tree, but today's video will be focused on tier 10s that you should avoid. Usually the tech trees leading up to them are pretty bad, but I think you guys will probably find that out if you decide to go towards them. You know, this isn't a video slating any exact people that go towards a certain tanks, but if you are going towards any of these, I would suggest maybe diverting the course away from them. So first things first, we will start with our first one, which is the T110E3. This is the American tier 10 tank destroyer. It's not got a turret, so it's not like the E4. This thing actually is pretty terrible in game. It's just because the armor is the main aspect of the tank. Obviously you don't get a turret, so you know the whole point of being an E3 is to be better with your armor than an E4 is, and that just isn't the case in modern day World of Tanks console, that's for sure. And I guess on PC that doesn't really happen either. You know, the E3 is very much regarded as the weaker one of the two, and it certainly isn't the one I would go for first, and that's why I actually on my main account went for the E4 first. You know, I've gone down to the T95, but that's only because I wanted to play that. Now with regards to the T110E3, what's bad about it? Well, it's this lower plate. Although it is stronger than the E4, the whole aspect of it is that the lower half of this lower plate is actually really weak, and if you try and angle, most people can just go straight through it, especially if they're firing premium, which is you know, 90% of players on console, especially when they realise that they aren't going to pen you with standard. They'll just start loading gold and they'll go through this lower plate fairly easily. I mean, it is well angled, which means the effective armour is quite high. But when you have like 300mm of penetration, you can more than likely go through this lower half of the lower plate on this thing. You know, the boat shape, especially if they're angling, you know, it makes it even easier to go through, and half the time if they angle too much you can actually go through the side of them, and if you get anywhere on the side of this tank it is pretty much good night for you, because this tank really doesn't have any weak points or strong points on the side. You know, the engine deck is super weak, so you can actually pen it if they're even trying to side scrape or do anything like this. You can actually just shoot the engine deck from here. Which is kind of the case with the American tanks at tier 10. You can actually shoot a lot of their engine decks even if you're on a level playing field with them. In terms of the cupola, it's not actually a weak point, so don't actually shoot at that unless you've got super high penetration rounds, like heat rounds from a Jaeger, but even then you're probably not going to be able to pen this. Now, why is it worse than the E4? Well, just not having a turret makes it 10 times worse. This thing is going to struggle when you're actually getting outflanked. You're going to get outflanked a lot easier than in the E4. This thing, just mobility wise, is also worse in every way. It's just a worse version, and I just would strongly recommend you guys don't go towards this. It has maybe more hit points by 50 hit points, but that really doesn't make much of a difference. You'll see the gun is the exact same, so it's not like you get a better gun. You'll see that the still concealment of the E4 is actually better than the E3, which means you can use its camo a little bit better. Not that it makes too much of a difference in game, but you can see just how effective the armour is on the E4, much weaker than the E3, but when people have that high penetration it doesn't really matter. So I think that's it for the E3. I would avoid it, 100% go towards the E4 if you're going to play it. The line leading up to it is far nicer as well. I mean, you've got a few terrible ones like the T25/2, but the rest of them, the T28 Prot was quite fun to play, the T30 was really nice to play, and then the E4 itself is a nice one as well. Now you'll be surprised to know that the K91 makes its appearance on this list, a Russian medium tank at tier 10. It's very unusual that Russian tanks are in the worst tanks in the game, but this one certainly is. This thing is basically focuses and relies upon DPM, but its armour is absolutely dreadful. You really don't bounce very much in this thing. It's kind of like you get onto the 430 version 2, it's really nice, and then you get into this thing and it's just like what on earth happened. You're probably better off playing the tier 9, to be honest with you. This thing really is a bit weak in game. Yeah, you get 320 alpha, yeah, you get high rate of fire, and if we look at it, you get 7.59 rounds a minute. With decent accuracy, but you don't get a full turret, which means you can get out-traversed by other mediums and light tanks. Not that, you know, that's going to happen an awful lot, but it is possible. This thing really, really is annoying to play, and I certainly wouldn't recommend it to anyone that's just started the game, and I certainly wouldn't recommend it over any of the other Russian medium tanks at tier 10. A lot of them just have better armour, they've got, you know, very, very similar guns. A lot of them are just, yeah, better. When you look at the 430U and the armour profile that this offers, compare it to the K91, and it's not even comparable. The turret armour of the 430 is just way better, and when you look at this, it's just absolutely awful. You know, the only good parts, I guess, are some areas where it's well angled, but even then, because it's fairly flat, means that you're going to pretty much get penned anyway, even though it is really high levels of armour in them areas to the left of the turret. The right hand side is awful, and the cupolas are quite prominent, as well as the bit on top of the tank. And often, because this is so low profile, it means that your armour really, you can actually shoot down onto the top of the tank, which is even worse. And when you look at the hull armour of this thing, when it's not even angled and you're looking down onto it, it's even worse. This thing is just a bit lackluster, and 100% you'd be better off looking at going towards the 430U, the 140, the T62A and the 430 well before the K91. I think that would be my last option in terms of the one I'd go for. Personally, I think you'd better off going towards the 430U as your first medium, because it's kind of like a medium heavy sort of playstyle, a heavium. Yeah, I think I'd go towards that personally if I was to pick any of these tanks. I don't think it's to anyone's surprise that the Rimertal Panzerwagen, the tier 10 German light tank, comes into this list as a light tank that you really don't want to go for first if you're going to buy any of the tier 10 light tanks. This thing is just huge. It's actually massive in game. It's not that good at turning. I find it's kind of one of those that you end up actually just getting stomped. The armour doesn't work like the Sheridan, because often you can actually bounce shots off the side of the Sheridan from stupid angles where they really should pen. But this one is just weak. It just is weak. And I think that it's just not got that power of the other light tanks. You have an alright DPM at 8 rounds a minute with 320 alpha, but it just doesn't, it's pale in comparison to the other ones. The T100 LT is just 100% better. You can actually move around the battlefield far easier in that thing than this one. You're lower profile, which means that your armour actually works better because it's more angled. You're a harder target to hit. This thing's just a box, and it really does get taken out in so many games so easily. And you really don't get much advantage of being taller either. So I don't think that I would ever recommend this, and I don't think any experienced player on this game would ever say that the Rimertal Panzerwagen is one that you should be going for first. In fact, I think most players will agree that this one is definitely one to avoid. I mean, even the line going up to it isn't particularly amazing. The Hawk 12 is actually a nice one, and the Spar Panzer was nice. I haven't played the RU, but I've heard that it's just a little bit worse now that it's gone up to tier 9 from tier 8 where it used to be. Certainly the Panzerwagen is just a bit of a step down as you go up tier for tier in this tech tree. The fourth one on the list is the AMX M4 54 MLE. This is a tank that I would 100% try and get away from. This thing really is just terrible. I'm not going to lie. It's just terrible at tier 10. The armour just doesn't work. Yeah, you're found very, very vulnerable from the front. You know, if you try and angle, it's completely negated by the side panel, which is so easy to pen. And also you can pen through the tracks at angles where in other tanks the tracks actually cover. This thing just doesn't have armour. The turret can be used effectively, but even then, some areas on the turret, like the cupolas, are really easy to hit, and you can actually manage to pen them really easily. The side of the turret is absolutely paper, and you can go through that very, very easily. It's just really not a tank I'd recommend, especially for beginners. It just doesn't offer much protection. The gun is alright, I guess, for a tier 10, but even then, when you've got this gun, DPM's pretty poor for a tier 10 heavy. I just think that this one really doesn't do much for me personally, and I know that for a lot of others that are trying to get into a heavy tank, this one probably won't be for you either. It's huge as well, may I like to say, which means that the side of the turret is easily given out to opponents, even if you are angling very well. Often they can actually just pen your cheeks, because that area just to the right of the mantlet, when you angle slightly, means that they can actually just go through it because it's not angled at all when they look at you. Your upper plate is fairly thick, so it's quite hard to actually pen that, especially when it's when they're looking up at you, or potentially if you are angling but not showing your side and the track, then I guess it does work sometimes, but for the majority of situations this tank is pretty poor, and I 100% wouldn't recommend this one in any sense of the word as your first tier 10 heavy, that's for sure, and it certainly is one I'd avoid picking up until the end of my heavy tank collection. Coming in at number 5, the last one in this video, we aren't going to go over every single one, but these are just the top 5 in my opinion as to ones I would avoid. This one is the 113. This is a tier 10 Chinese heavy tank. This one pretty much is a worse version of the WZ-111 Model 5A. This is the other tier 10 Chinese heavy tank. The WZ is just a better version, it's got more alpha, it has slightly less health, but it does have a lot better armour profile. It's actually stronger from the front, and the turret is actually a little stronger. Yeah, you do have a cupola, but just overall I think you'd be better off actually picking up the WZ. This one, the 113, has been left behind in the dust once again with a lot of these. They've just not been buffed enough, and they've just not been remained competitive in the current game modes and the current game meta, so I would just 100% try and avoid this. The rounds per minute and DPM is pretty poor on this thing. You're going to be looking at around 2,400 DPM overall, which is okay, but it's nothing substantial for a heavy tank. I guess you could try it out, but for me personally, if I'm going up the Chinese heavy tanks, I certainly will not be getting the 113 first, and I'd be looking at getting the WZ-111 Model 5A for sure. Now, what does the WZ offer? Obviously, it's got a better angled hull armour, which means you can bounce more shots. The gun's better. You're probably looking at better DPM as well. The accuracy is slightly worse, but you can buff that up with a lot of the other perks that you've got now available to you after update 6.0 to console, so I wouldn't worry about your accuracy in this thing comparatively to the 113. Hit points don't really mean anything, to be honest with you, and losing 100 hit points to just gain a lot better tank, then I would 100% trade that off. So it's up to you whether you agree with these. Please let me know in the comment section down below what you did actually think of these tanks, whether you think that there should have been some others like the Type 5 in there, maybe some other French tanks or British tanks like the FV215B standard, not the 183, but just this tank right here. Or do you think some of the German ones like the King Lerver maybe should have made it onto the list just because they are supposed to side scrape, but they actually don't really work very well because of that kind of circular bit where the turret is mounted on? Or do you think things like the Gorilla have been kind of left out a little bit and just aren't as competitive as they were when they first came into the game? I'd like to hear your thoughts, and you can do so in the comment section down below. If you want to check out some more top 5 guides and also some videos for World of Tanks console, then you can do so on screen right now. I'll link a playlist as well as my most recent video on the news most likely. Other than that, I hope you guys do enjoy the video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Goodbye.